What's up guys, Joey here at schoolofmotion.com and welcome to day one of 30 days of After Effects. Over the next 30 days we're going to learn a ton about After Effects and none of this would be possible without our sponsor, the Department of Motion Design at the Ringling College of Art and Design right here in Sarasota, Florida. You know, learning After Effects techniques is great, but without understanding design principles and animation principles and how to manage a project and how to come up with good ideas in the first place, without that, you are not going to be a very effective motion designer. And Ringling is excellent at teaching that. I know because I was a teacher there. Also, they've been gracious enough to sponsor a contest. So if you want to find out more about the contest where you can actually get your work reviewed by the Ringling faculty, click the link below. So for this first episode of 30 Days of After Effects, we are going to talk about write-on effects in After Effects. There's a lot of ways to do it. You will definitely be asked to do it at some point in your career. And I'm going to show you a few ways, including one really neat way that takes a little more time, but it gives you an amazing result. So let's hop into After Effects and get started. So before I show you guys how to create this really nice painted, write-on effect, I'm going to show you a couple of really quick and dirty ways to do it too, because this technique here, while it looks great, it also takes a good amount of time. And depending on the font you have and how many different letters, it could take hours. So sometimes you don't have hours, and sometimes you're doing those jobs that, really you're just paying the bills and it's got to get done quick, and you can't spend an entire day creating one write-on effect for type. So first, let me show you the quick and dirty way. So I'm going to create a new composition here, and we'll just call this quick write-on. All right, and I'm going to spell out my name, and you can spell out my name too if you want, or spell out your name, and that's okay too. All right. So let me just size this up. Usually when I do write-ons, I'll try to make the type bigger than I know it's going to need to be, and that way I can always scale it down. Obviously you don't want to scale things up because then you're losing resolution. So I'm going to pre-comp this now. This is a type layer, but I'm going to select it and hit Shift-Command-C, and I'm going to name this name PC for pre-comp. That's my little abbreviation. All right, and so now I've turned that type layer into just a big layer that now I can put effects on. And the first way I'm going to show you to do this write-on effect is by using the After Effects paint system. The paint system in After Effects is old and crappy, to be quite honest with you, but it actually works pretty well for this. So in order to paint on a layer, if I click on this paintbrush and I try to paint on this, right? It's not going to let me, and I'm going to get this warning saying use the paint and blah 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 in a layer panel. So here's what it's telling me. This is my composition panel right here. This is showing me the end result of all my layers and everything that I'm comping together. If I want to paint on a layer, I have to do it in a layer panel. So the way you get to that is you control click or right click your layer, and you go down to open layer. Okay, and when you click that, you can see now After Effects has opened another window here, and it's really small. So let me stretch it out like this, okay? All right, so I'm gonna click over in this window for a minute and just zoom out. There we go. And then over here, so what I'm looking at is I have two windows up. This is the end result, my composition, and this is just the layer, just this one layer. And right now they're gonna look identical. You can see that now with my paintbrush selected, and my layer panel open, I can start painting on this, okay? Now the goal is to basically mimic the way you would write these letters, okay? So I'm just gonna do this for each letter. But first we have to make sure the settings are right. So the first thing is the size of the brush needs to be, thick enough so that when I write down like this, I'm covering up the entire letter. A quick tip is you can just hold Command on a Mac, and you can click, and drag like this and make the brush bigger and smaller. So if you have a thinner font, you should use a thinner brush. And the main reason not to just use some gigantic brush like this is because if all I want to do is write on the J, well, I'm also writing on part of the O right now. All right, so we get that brush the right size, okay? By the way, I'm using a Wacom tablet, and that allows you to have pressure sensitive paint strokes. So if I hold it lightly, I can be very thin, and then as I push harder, it gets fatter. And it's a lot easier to do this with a tablet, so I highly recommend one. So I have my paintbrush tool, and over here in the paint settings, and if you don't see this, just go to your window menu and make sure that you grab that, and that should open up this window for you. I want to make sure that the duration is set to constant, okay? Now there's actually a write-on duration. I don't like to use that, and I'll show you why. If I use write-on, this is what happens. I draw this paint stroke, and as soon as I let go, I can't see the paint stroke anymore. And if I hit spacebar, it will play back my paint stroke for me, which is cool, okay? But the problem with that is that I want to fill up every single pixel of this font with paint, and it's hard to do that if I can't see the stroke that I just painted. So it's easier to do this first with a constant duration. All right, and that's it. You want to paint on the RGBA channel, so that's every single channel. The mode is set to normal, opacity and flow are 100%. That's what you want. For the brush, right now I've got pretty much the default brush. The hardness is set to 0, so you can see that the edges are kind of feathered, which, you know, is kind of nice. I don't want it that feathered, so I'm gonna increase that, and you can see this little preview here. Tells you what you're doing to your brush. There we go. That's much better. The other thing, normally this spacing setting I think is at like 50% or 25%, and you can see that when I draw a shape, it actually just puts a bunch of little circles in a row, and it can kind of start to look lumpy. So I put the spacing down as low as it can go, which I think is 1%, and that way you get nice smooth curves when you paint. So there you go. So the next thing to do is to draw this, and you have to be very careful. Draw it the way you actually would write these letters. For example, the way I write a Y is this stroke first, then this stroke, okay? And so that's why I wouldn't go like this and then do that, because that's not gonna look right if you're doing handwriting. So first let's do the J, okay? Now you're gonna see a problem right away. I can pretty much cover up this entire J except for the serif. So you have to make a creative call. Do I want that serif to be kind of knocked out with a separate stroke, or you can kind of cheat it and you can kind of, you know, start it here and then come down like this. And I think for this, that's what I'll do. Okay, so I've got the J. Now I'll do the O. And if you mess up, right, you just hit undo. So let's say I didn't like that. So I hit undo and then I just do it again. All right, now I'll do the E. Now the E is going to be a downstroke and 3 horizontal strokes. So for the downstroke, I want to try and catch that serif, catch this one, and then here's where you got to be a little careful. And there's not really, this is one of the problems with this paint technique, is it's hard to be precise. And you're not, you know, you're going to end up hitting a little bit of that Y, and that's going to get revealed, and you don't really want that. The solution would be to separate all these letters out onto their own layers and do this one by one for each letter. But of course, you know, this client isn't paying us enough for that. All right, so now we'll do the Y. So I'll catch this serif, come down here, and then I'll catch this serif and do this, and there you go. Now, if you come down to this layer, right, and I can close this layer window now. And let's open this back up. All right, so if I hit E to bring up my effects, you see here's my paint effect. And if I open that up, you can see I actually have these little mini layers for every single brush, okay? And brush 1 is the first stroke I did, the J. Brush 8 is the last stroke I did, so it goes in order. So that's why it's important to actually write these letters in the right order too. And if I open up the settings for brush 1, you can see there's a whole bunch of settings in here, right? And the one I want to get to is this end. So in the stroke options for each brush stroke, you can animate the start and end. And you'll see if I animate the end, right, I can actually have this thing draw on. It's really nice, okay? So I want to animate that ending property for every single paint stroke. So here's a little trick. I know that the property I'm looking for is called end, so in the little search box, I'm just going to type end. And you'll see it brings up all of those properties for me, okay? By the way, I don't know, maybe you guys didn't know you could do this. If you hold the space bar and you click in this little area that has nothing in it, you can scroll up and down on your timeline. It's kind of handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the stopwatch for all of these. and I'm going to set them all to 0 to start with, okay? So what I'm going to do is select every single end, and I'm just holding shift and clicking them all, set them all to 0, and then I'll go forward, you know, let's say I go forward 6 frames and set them to 100. Okay, now if I hit U, and if you guys don't know, U is the hotkey in After Effects. It brings up every animated property on whatever layer is selected. Now I just see those keyframes, okay? I'm gonna make this window a little bit smaller so I can see all of these. And we can still see this whole thing, great. Okay, so next thing I need to do is sequence these, all right? So this J gets written first, all right, and then the O. So I'm just gonna drag these like this, all right? So we get the J, then the O, and maybe I wanna have the O start a little bit, you know, like maybe a 1 frame towards the end of the J, because I want this to happen pretty quickly. All right, and then here's the E, right? So you get that first line of the E, and then you know that these next 3 strokes are the little horizontal parts of the E. All right, and those are much shorter lines, so those maybe don't take as many frames to write on, and you just kind of sequence them. And really, you know, this is just sort of experimenting and playing around with timing and seeing what feels right. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move my playhead over here. I'm gonna hit the N key, and N, if you guys don't know that hotkey, that just moves the out point, this little guy here. It moves this to wherever your playhead is. All right, so now I'm gonna RAM preview this, and let's see what this looks like. Okay, so now you can see it's writing on my name. Now obviously that's not what we want. We want to reveal the font using this. So all we need to do, let's rename this layer here Paint, and let's duplicate it and call this Font. And what we want to do is have this paint layer be matted out by the original font. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my font layer. I'm going to delete the paint effect off of it. I'm going to, by the way, I'm going to do this a lot, and I want to make sure I don't lose anybody. What I'm looking for is my track matte column, so I can set the matte for this layer, but you can see it wasn't there, so I'm hitting F4. F4 toggles between these 2 sets of columns. There's a button down here that does that too, but I always use F4. So I'm going to tell the paint layer, right, this red layer, to use the font layer as the alpha matte. And there we go. Okay, now there's one last thing that I forgot to do. So what's happening here is, let me undo this for a minute, and let me turn off this. Okay, so the font layer is off. It's not visible right now. All we're seeing is the paint layer. The paint layer, if you remember, is the pre-comp that has my name in it with a paint effect on top of it. And the last step I need to do is, once the paint is working the way I want, I need to click on Paint on Transparent. What this is going to do is it's going to turn off the reference basically that I was painting over, and it's only going to show me the paint strokes. So now when I set this to use the font layer as the alpha matte, it will write on this type, okay? And this red color makes it horrible to see. So I'm gonna use a fill effect on this paint. Right, so I have my paint effect and then a fill effect to just change the color of the layer to black. Right, and there you go. You can see there's your simple, quick and dirty write-on. Now, if I wasn't talking through this, I probably could have done that in 2 minutes. So if you have a ton of you know, writing that you need to write on, this is a fast way to do it. Now, it doesn't look very good, and there's a couple of tricks that can kind of help it. You can see that one big problem is that you have, you know, there's just a very soft, unnatural edge, right? So one thing you can do, because you have it set up this way, and you are, you know, you're basically filling in the, you're filling in this font, right, with this painted effect that you've done. You can add more effects to the paint, right? And actually, another way to do this too, maybe this way might even work better, is to just reverse the order of this. Take this font. Let me get rid of this fill effect for a moment. Take this font and use the paint as the alpha matte, and this will kind of do the same thing for you, right? And now what I can do is I can take this paint effect, which is my matte, and I can put effects on it. So I'm gonna grab the stylize roughen edges effect. And this effect can be kind of cheesy if you overdo it, but you can see what it does. Actually, let me turn this layer on for a minute. You can see exactly what it's doing. It's literally roughening the edges of that paint, right? And so as it paints, it just kind of makes it look a little bit more natural. And so now if I turn this off, you'll see it's gonna give that right-on effect just a little bit more of a grungy kind of look, right? And there's a lot of settings. You can try different different types of edges. You can turn the sharpness down if you want, and it'll make it a little bit softer. You know, it can start to look really terrible if you go too far with it, which I have. But if you use a light touch, it actually can work out okay. And another trick that I like to do a lot when I do stuff like this is let's say I'm fairly happy with this, right? I can take this setup, pre-compose this, and we can just call this Joey Right On. And I'll duplicate it, and I'll offset one of these by 1 frame. The way I just did that, by the way, hold Option and hit Page Down, and it nudges your layer forward 1 frame. It's just a quick way to offset things. And I'm gonna take this bottom copy here, and I'm gonna make the opacity 50%. So now, what you get is you get this kind of leading edge. All right, and it can just help sort of visually soften the effect of this super hard edge. Another thing you can do too is, I just line these back up for a second, is you can select your layers and you can turn on time remapping, okay, right there. And then, let me scrub forward. So the animation finishes here. So I'm gonna put a keyframe there. And then I'm gonna move that keyframe way over here. And what I'm doing is I'm making this animation take longer. And so it's gonna end up smoothing out the animation a little bit by doing this. And this is something that, you know, when you're doing this with paint, sometimes you'll get some weird artifacts when you do that. But there you go. You can see this is a quick, super easy way to do this. Let me show you one more way that's a little bit more controllable, and then I'm going to show you the cool way. So here's one more way. So let's go back into my font here, okay? So we've got this, right? So this is my name pre-comp. So I'm just going to drag this into a new comp here, and we're going to call this Right On Stroke. And the reason I'm going to call it Right On Stroke is because we're going to use a different technique to do this. So the way we're going to do it this time, instead of using the paint effect, we're going to use shape layers, because shape layers are a little bit more controllable. So I'm going to select the pen tool up here. Make sure you have no layer selected. That is very important. If you have a layer selected, it's going to put a mask on that layer, which is not what we want. We want a shape layer. So I'm going to just draw a shape, and you can tell I've already practiced this tutorial because, of course, it's got the perfect little thickness of the shape, right? And what I'm doing is I'm just drawing a shape. Now, what it's doing is it's creating a shape layer with a stroke on it, and then I can adjust the width of that stroke, and I can adjust these points, right? And then I can add more points, and I can, you know, move things around and use this to cover up the letter. And I'm basically doing the exact same thing with this shape layer that I would have done with paint, right? So this is for the J. And now what I would do with this shape is I would open up this little arrow here, and on a shape layer, you can add a whole bunch of modifiers to it. So one that I use all the time is called Trim Paths. And the way you add it is you just open up the arrow, click Add, Trim Paths, and then you can open up the options for that. And if you animate the end property, it does the exact same thing. You can see here, though, it's very smooth, and you have so much control. And when you time remap this, it gets very, very smooth. It never gets jerky the way paint can get if you're not careful. Okay, so what I would do is I would just set a keyframe here. I would go 6 frames forward, right? Do the same thing. And, you know, one thing that's great about doing this trick, right? So now let's do the O. So I have to make sure nothing is selected. If I have this layer selected and I try and draw the shape of the O, it's gonna put that O's shape on the same layer as the J, which is not what I want. I want a separate layer. So nothing is selected, and I just quickly, you know, fill in O here. And you don't have to be super duper precise because, again, you're not gonna see this stroke at all. You're just gonna see you're gonna see the layer that's using that stroke as a mat. Now this O needs to be a little thicker, so I can make that stroke thicker. And this is why I like to have things on different layers, because now it's very easy. This stroke can be thicker than the J. All right, we'll call this O. And now I can actually click on this trim pads I added, and it's got keyframes on it, and I can copy, right? And then just move this O to where I want it to start and hit paste. I did that wrong. Let's try that. Copy, paste. There we go. All right, and so now if I hit U to reveal the keyframes, you'll see it copied that trim pads and those keyframes on there. And what's cool about this is you can do easy ease, and you can make the, you know, if you really want to slow this down, right? What you could do is move these keyframes further apart, like maybe a second, you know, so it takes a longer time to write these letters out. And then you can select your keyframes, go to your curves editor, and really amplify the ease, right? So now you can get a little bit more, right? And what's cool about this is, you know, as opposed to the paint, is it's super duper smooth, it's super duper controllable, and this, you know, it just has a different feel to it. So I'm not gonna do every letter. I don't want you guys to have to sit and watch me do that. So let me just pre-comp this real quick, the J and the O, right? And it's the same trick. So this is gonna be our mat, and we're just gonna tell the font underneath, use the mat as our alphabet, all right? And there you go. Now you have a much smoother write-on, and you can still do the exact same tricks, right? If you wanna put rough and edges on that, you can. Okay, and now here's a problem with rough and edges. It actually erodes away some of your image, right? And so if you have it set too high, the edge looks really nice here, but the problem is we're actually eating away at some of this type here. So a good trick to fix that is to use an effect called a simple choker, and you're gonna want this before the rough and edges. And what the simple choker does, if I turn the mat back on and turn rough and edges off, the simple choker, it just erodes or, you know, creates more matte, right? It's called eroding or dilating. All right, so what I'm gonna do is dilate it just a little bit. I'm just dragging this choke mat backwards into negative numbers, and so that way when we roughen the edges, you still get those nice rough edges, but you're not losing any of the matte that you need to fill in the letters. Cool? So that's another cool way. Now, this is actually the way I do it most of the time because it takes a little bit more time than painting, but it's very controllable, and you have a lot of flexibility and precision with it. And then, you know, you can add texture to it really easily. If you look in the description of this tutorial, I've linked to a bunch of resources that I used, which are all free to use, and I've given credit to the right people. So there are some really cool resources out there if you just want to get, you know, some nice textures and make things feel a little bit more organic. You know, I can basically put a texture over this whole setup and click the transparency button, which a lot of people don't know about, but it's a nice little trick. It basically just lets you use everything underneath it in the composition as a matte. It's really a slick way to do it. And there you go. And so now you know, you've got this nice sort of paint effect. There's a nice texture on there. You know, it's obviously too bright. We need to, like, you know, push that a little cooler, desaturate it, darken it a little bit. There we go. Cool. All right, so now what you all came for. Let's talk about the big fancy write-on here, okay? Now this has a lot going on, okay? And I'm gonna try, in true School of Motion fashion, to let you see in my brain how I figured out how to do this, because it's great. I can show you exactly what to do and you can copy it, but it's better if you can start to think this way and figure this stuff out on your own and make up your own cool effects, right? So what has always bothered me about the write-on effects that I've done is they don't really look like a paintbrush, right? Because that's what we're trying to mimic here. It's either a paintbrush or a marker or a pencil. It doesn't really look like the actual brush is following the contours and making those letters move, right? Or making the ink move to fill in the letters. And if you see what we've achieved here, it really does look like there's little brushes painting these things on. And by the way, this is not the only way to do it. There may even be better ways, but this way seemed to work pretty well for me. So here we go. So to start with, I created in Illustrator. I took this kind of nifty thick font, and thick fonts are good for this because they give you a lot of chunky areas of type to reveal, and I just split them up into each letter and I kind of offset them a little bit. Okay, so what I want to do is one at a time create the brush strokes that are going to reveal each letter. Okay, and I won't do them all in this tutorial. I'll do one or two, and then you'll get it, right? So let's start with the R. What I'm going to do is pre-comp this R, and I'm just going to call this R-PC. We're going to dive in here. Now, what I was thinking was, I want to be able to use a real brush stroke to be able to reveal this, okay? The internet is just filled with, like, brush stroke video, brush stroke stills. You can go to the art store and make your own brush strokes and take a picture and scan it. I mean, there's a million ways to get great brush strokes. I found a free resource on the internet, which I have linked to, so you are free to grab these if you want to. And these are just, high contrast paint stroke images, okay? And I said, I want to be able to make this paint stroke animate and, come down this way and then curve around this way, and I want it to feel like a paint stroke. So, I come from, After Effects and Cinema 4D background primarily. So in Cinema 4D, you've got this great tool where you can sweep a shape along a spline, right? So if I have this paint stroke, which is just a horizontal paint stroke, but I want to curve it, right? Like around this shape. In Cinema 4D, that's really easy to do. In After Effects, there's no built-in way to do that. But I have to thank EJ over at iDesign, because I can't even remember when I saw this, but I saw a tutorial of his. He mentioned this plugin called Amino Snake, and it is free. And I've linked to that as well. So I'm going to use that plugin for this, and it's amazing. So watch this. First thing I need to do is I need to pre-comp these brush strokes, okay? So I'm going to pre-comp them, Shift-Command-C, and I'm going to just call this brush. And I'm going to call it brush-R, because this is going to be specifically the brush stroke for the R. It may also be the brush stroke for every other letter, but I just like to name things carefully, right? Just in case. You can see my composition. It's getting a little sloppy here. My project's getting sloppy. I normally wouldn't stand for that, but I'm trying to be a little briefer with these things. All right, so here's our brush pre-comp. Now, all I want is this stroke, okay? You could use any of these, but I like this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this little guy here, this little button. This is the region of interest button in After Effects. And what it does, it lets you draw a window. All right, and the first thing it does is it tells After Effects, this is the only part of the composition I want you to render. So it's really useful if you have a very, complicated comp, takes a long time to render, and you just want to work on this piece of it, and it'll render faster for you. You can also crop your composition with it. So if you click that button, drag a box around here, and then go up to Composition, crop comp to region of interest, and it will crop your composition for you. Okay? So that's step one. You crop this paintbrush. Okay, so now let's go back into our R-PC. Now, I need to, the first thing I need to do is I actually need to turn this black and white image into something that has transparency. So let's go back into that pre-comp real quick. Here's a, there's an easy way to do it, and there's a slightly harder way, which is what I'm going to show you because I like it better this way. Here's the easy way. You take a white solid, right? Command Y, create a new white solid, and you put it underneath the brush stroke, and you say track matte, Luma inverted matte. Okay. If I turn on the transparency grid, you can see that now I've got a nice transparent white paint stroke here. The reason I don't love doing it this way is because now if I scale this brush stroke like this, I'm seeing the white behind it, right? So that can create problems if you have to stretch this thing. So the way I like to do it, let me delete that, turn this back on, and let me scale this back up to 100%. I'm gonna use two effects. One is it's in the channel menu here. It's called Set Matte. And Set Matte is an effect that lets you use either a different channel within an image or a different layer as an alpha channel. And so when I put it on this layer, right, the options are which layer am I taking the matte from? And by default, it's looking at itself, right, at the image. Use for matte alpha channel. Well, this image doesn't have an alpha channel. That's my problem. So I'm going to change that to luminance. Okay, now I'm going to turn on my transparency grid. And you can see what it's done here, okay? What it's doing now is it's actually knocking out the paint stroke. It's doing the opposite of what I want. So you can just click this invert matte button, and now, there we go. Now I've got transparency. Now I don't want a black paint stroke, I want a white paint stroke. So then I'll go to my old buddy, Generate Fill, and we'll just make it white. And there you go. So now if we go back into this R-PC, I now have this nice paint stroke, right? And this is great because now, let me turn this grid off. If I scale or stretch this, I don't get any of those weird artifacts. Nice little tip. All right, so now I need this brush stroke to follow the contours of this letter. Now, obviously that's not gonna be that hard to do for this part of the R, but it's gonna be a little bit harder for the curvy part. Now, this is where this amazing plugin comes in. So first thing we do is we turn off this layer. You don't need to see it. We make a new solid, and I'm gonna call this solid R Matte 01. Okay. And let's make this a different color, just so that we can see the paint stroke over it if we need to. And I'm going to apply the effect. The effect is in the Omino group, and these are all free plugins. Whoever made this guy is amazing. You know, pay him, give him money, throw money at him. All right, so Omino Snake. And the way this plugin works is you have to tell it first, which layer is going to be the source of the image that you want it to wrap. And I want it to use this paintbrush image. So I'm going to tell it to use brush R. The second thing it needs is a path, okay? So if I click on, I'm going to click on this adjustment layer icon for a minute. And this is a trick I use a lot. The only reason I did that is so I can see through the layer. Okay, I don't actually need it to be an adjustment layer. But what I do need to do is put a mask on this layer in the shape that I want the Omino Snake effect to warp that paintbrush image. So the first stroke of the R is going to be this downstroke. All right. So now what I can do is I can turn this adjustment layer off, and I'm going to tell the effect the source layer is brush-R. The path is mask 1. And you can see, I'm going to turn the mask visibility off for a minute. You can see what's going on. There's a little white line there, okay? By default, the source scale is set to 5%. So you generally need that to be a lot bigger, okay? Now, if you just scale it like this, okay, you'll be able to see right there, it starts to clip the image, so I need to bring it back, and that is the ideal scale for this stroke at this kind of scale, basically. All right. There's an option here that I'm going to turn on called Clear Background, which now gets rid of the background. Okay, so now I can see the paint stroke over the art. Now it's not thick enough, and so there's a few options you have to make sure are set correctly. the source Y center. All right, let me zoom in here and go to full res for a minute so you guys can see this. The source Y center, you can see it kind of shifts the image around. So you can see, let me turn the mask visibility back on here. It shifts the center of that image on the mask, right? And so you want to make sure that that's centered so you get both the left and the right side of the image, right? You've also got the Y width, which, you know, if it's too thin, you need to expand that out, but that's not the problem. And then you've got the X length, which is set correctly. That's why you're not seeing any problems. But if it's not set correctly, it will actually get rid of some of the image there. And there you go. Now, the main settings you use on this when you're animating it, you use the advanced setting here, and this lets you move the image along the path. I mean, this is amazing. This should be built into After Effects. Adobe should just buy this from this guy. Oh, this is great. All right. But it's obviously not thick enough right now. So what I'm going to do is I need to thicken that stroke up quite a bit. So what I actually want to do is thicken it up in this pre-comp, okay? But I want to be able to see the result of it here. So I'm going to use 2 comp viewers to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and click this lock. Unlock this comp viewer. Then I'm going to double click my brush -R and I'm going to lock this comp viewer. So now I've got 2 comp viewers, and I can grab the little left side of here. You see there's these little tiny, almost invisible divots in this tab, and you can click and drag and move this window to the left side here. And now I can see both the results and the comp. So I'm going to move the anchor point of this layer. You can see right now it's here. So I'm going to hit Y and move it right in the middle. And then I'm going to scale it up vertically like this. Okay, so now it's thicker. So now I can come back into this comp and I can adjust this mask like this. All right, and now just to get this out of the way, you are not going to be able to obviously fill in this font perfectly just with a paint stroke, okay? There's holes in the paint stroke. That's what makes it look natural and makes it look like a paint stroke. So we're gonna have to do something else to actually get this to fill in, all right? So that'll be another trick I'll show you in a few minutes. But first, let's just try to get this as close as we can, all right? And what's cool is you can just kind of interactively, you know, adjust this mask. All right, so now we've got 1 paint stroke. And what I'm gonna do is, you know, oh, here's another setting I wanna talk about. You see these little lines, right? It almost looks like there's an error happening. Well, the way this plugin works is it actually divides this image up into a bunch of little triangles, and so it can move them around, and that's why you can see little triangles here. The default setting is designed to make the plugin render faster. It's not designed for quality. And so that is a problem, and that's easy to fix. There's a setting here called draw step. And the smaller that number is, the more detail you get, right? So if you set that down to 1, now you get maximum detail, okay? And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna animate this advanced parameter here. We're gonna start here, all right? And you can see that this isn't actually doing exactly what I want. I want that to start here, like that. There we go. That's what I want, all right? And end about there, okay? So we'll start here. Put a keyframe on advance. Let's go forward maybe 1 second. We're working at 24 frames a second, so that was 24 frames. Go like this. Wonderful. I'm gonna go into the curve editor here. I'm gonna select those keyframes, hit F9 to make them easy ease keyframes. Come into the curve editor, and I'm going to stretch out these Bezier handles so I get a nice ease in, ease out. Okay. If you're not familiar with the curve editor, go back and watch my tutorial called Introduction to Animation Curves. That will explain everything you need to know about what that is doing. All right, so that's 1 stroke. Now I need to do another stroke, and then there's obviously this little serif here we need to fix. So what I'm gonna do is just duplicate this layer, and then I'm just gonna I'm gonna turn off the effect for a minute. Delete that mask. make this into adjustment layer. And I'm just going to draw a new shape. And before I turn this effect back on, I'm going to set the path to this new mask. Okay, and then I turn the effect back on, and we're good to go. Okay, now here's something. Look, this plugin, it was written by this guy, and he even says on the website that this was written in like one night for this project he was doing. So it's a little bit buggy. So I have to warn you, if you ever turn the effect on and you don't have a mask set, it will lock up your computer, for 30 seconds, and it may make you think that it's going to crash. So you just got to be careful. Obviously, save your work a lot when you're doing this kind of stuff. And there's also this strange bug where now the clear background, it actually seems to be doing the opposite of what I need it to do. So let me turn that off now. Again, I'm sorry that this isn't a little bit more polished, but sometimes motion design is messy. But now we've got our second stroke, right? And you can see that the mask goes all the way down to the tip of the R, but the paint stroke doesn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this last keyframe here on the advance property, and I'm going to move it, right? And now you can see what's happening here. The paint stroke is no longer long enough to reach. And so the way you can fix that is by turning up the source scale. So I need to adjust the advanced property back like this, and then turn the source scale up until we get the result we're looking for. And now I think that X length needs to be longer too. There we go. Okay. All right, so now you can see you get this it's a really nice brush stroke here. This is great, okay? And I want this brush stroke to start back here, just so there's no weird overlaps. Okay, so now I can offset this in time. Okay, let's move this forward 12 frames. So now you get first that stroke, and then this stroke, and the advance needs to be adjusted here. There we go. There we go. All right, so now you've got most of the R filled in. And I'm gonna try to make this work a little bit better. I'm gonna up the source scale a little bit more. I don't want it to go too far because I don't want to distort the paint stroke too much. But you can also mess with the actual shape of the mask and try to cover up a little bit more of the shape there. Okay, that's great. And then now I need to do the serif part here. I definitely need that to be filled in. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just duplicate this RMAT 01. We're gonna call this layer RMAT 03. All right, we'll offset it in time a little bit. And I'm just gonna manually, I'm gonna delete a bunch of these points on this mask. So there's only 2 left. And then I'm just gonna move this mask down here like this. And I'm gonna adjust the source scale until it's the right size for me. There we go. And then I can adjust the advance amount until it gets right to the edge there. Okay, and then that's going to be a quicker stroke, so these keyframes will happen, faster in time. And now you've got this happening. All right. Now you're probably starting to see where this is going. This is going to start looking cool. So now that we've got that set up, there's a little bit more to it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this R and I'm going to move it up to the top of this comp. I'm going to hit F4 and I'm going to set the transfer mode to stencil alpha. Now, because of my screen capture software, you can't actually see where my mouse is going, but I'm going down to stencil alpha, okay? And what that does is it tells this layer to become the matte for every single layer below it. All right, so now you can kind of see the paint stroke drawing on, okay? And it's working fairly well. Pretty cool. All right. Now I'm gonna duplicate this R, turn the mode back to normal, and I'm going to turn the stencil off, okay, because I still need to work on this a little bit more. Now, one of the things that I found was, I'm getting a little bit too much of the sense that this is not a paintbrush actually creating a paint stroke, but that it's a picture of a paint stroke being moved through a font, if that makes sense. It just looked a little bit too synthetic for me. So what I did was, okay, so let me go back to my initial setup here, and let me turn off the last two paint strokes, so we just have one paint stroke here. So what I decided to do was to duplicate this layer here, and let me open up my keyframes, and on this top copy here, which I'm going to make into a different color just so it's differentiated, instead of having it advance all the way through the letter, I'm going to set the initial keyframe to 0 so it moves, right, but just a little bit, and it's actually moving backwards. So let me scoot it back a little bit. I just want it to move a little bit forward, just a little bit, okay? And then I'm going to tell the bottom copy to use the top copy as the alpha matte, right? And it's a subtle little difference, but basically what it's doing is it's revealing the paint stroke with the paint stroke, but the two paint strokes are ever so slightly offset, okay? And you can offset them even a little bit more if you want to. But what it ends up doing is it just gives a little bit of a shimmer to it as parts of the paint stroke pass through a copy of itself that's offset. You get these nice little, kind of natural touches. So I want to do that with every paint stroke I've done, okay? So here's an easy way to do it. Let me reset this, get rid of this. So I've got 3 paint strokes, select them all, duplicate them. With the duplicates still selected, click on the color swatch over here and make them a different color so I can tell that they're different. Hit U to bring up the animated properties, and then just select all 3 of the initial keyframes and double click them. And now I can just type in a value for them. So they're going from, negative 500, negative 28 to all the way, to this one almost goes to 0. This one goes to negative 100. So the values are increasing. Okay, so that's key. So I just want them to increase a little bit less. Okay, so I'm just going to click on this, and instead of having these numbers be so far in the negative, I'll just set them all to 0. Okay, and then I'm going to select the bottom layers and tell them use the top layers as alpha mattes. All right, and now if we play this, okay, so there's our paint strokes. So now I'll turn the bottom R off, turn the top one back on so we can see how we're doing. Cool. All right, so we're getting there. Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is we need to fill in some more of these letters. So an easy way to do it, all right, is to just duplicate these paint strokes you've already got working and just scoot them over a little bit. So I'm going to take these bottom 2. All right, and those bottom 2 layers are the first vertical paint stroke. I'm going to duplicate them, and then I'm just going to use my arrow keys and I'm just going to nudge them over a little bit, right? Over and up a little bit, and just fill in a little bit more of that R, okay? And I'm going to offset them 2 frames forward in time, just so it's not perfectly lined up, okay? So now you see more of that R is filled in. I'll do the same thing with this big curvy paint stroke. I'll select these 2 layers, duplicate them, move them forward 2 frames, and then I'm just going to nudge them up and to the right with my keyboard, right? I'm just trying to find the sweet spot where they fill in the most R. And then I'll do the same thing with this last paint stroke. Select them, duplicate, forward 2 frames in time, and I'm just going to move this around until it's filling in most of the R. Okay? So by doing that, we filled in even more of the R. There's still a big chunk here that's missing. So let me grab the copy of my first stroke, duplicate it one more time, and scoot it over to the right. So it fills that in. Cool. All right, so you can see now we're pretty close, but there's still these little holes. So this is where the last trick comes in. I'm gonna add an adjustment layer. And I'm gonna put it right above all of these paint strokes that we've made. And on that adjustment layer, I'm gonna call this adjustment layer Dilate. All right, and I'm gonna use an effect in the channel menu called Minimax. All right, now let me turn this R off. Let me turn this stencil alpha layer off for a minute. What Minimax does is it kind of works like a matte choker, but it does it a little bit differently. That it's a little bit sort of, I don't know, smoother, more organic, whatever. It works a little bit better for this effect. The only reason I know that is because I tried the matte choker. I didn't like how it looked. Minimax, it does a different thing. So first thing I need to do is tell it to do this effect on not just the color but also the alpha. So alpha and color, and you can see what it does. It basically takes each pixel and it blooms it a little bit, right? So I want it to start out with the effect at 0, and as the paint begins to finish drawing the letter, I'm gonna put a keyframe there, and then I'm gonna go forward maybe 12 frames and I'm gonna dilate it, okay? Now I don't know how much to dilate it yet, so let me turn the R back on. Let's go back to 0 here, and all I wanna do is dilate it until all of the holes have been filled. And so when I get to 3, everything's been filled now. If I hit U on this dilate layer, I'm just gonna ease these keyframes just so that the transition's a little bit smoother. And so now when I RAM preview this, you'll see as the paint is finishing, it's actually thickening up those strokes at the same time. Cool? All right, so now is there anything else that's still bothering me? Well, one thing that's still bothering me is this stuff here in that first vertical stroke of the R. Because I'm just noticing it. It's drawing my eye. So what I want to do is maybe make one more copy and maybe offset these even a little bit and just try to just do my best here to try and, there we go. Cool. Okay. All right, so now what I'm gonna do, now I've got this R pre-comp, okay? So let's go back to our little letters pre-comp here, right? And I can close this. I don't need to see this anymore. Get a better look at this. Okay. So my other letters, we haven't done anything with yet. Oh, and I still have this composition viewer locked, so let me unlock that. Okay. So now I've got the R painting on. Cool. I would just do that to every single letter. And that's exactly what I did. If we go into my comp here and we go into the letters, you can see that I just did that to every letter. I offset them in time. And that's pretty much, that's the big trick, right? The rest of it was just compositing, adding a little texture. I will show you one cool trick that I did think was pretty neat. I wanted to have a little bit of a leading edge to this. So here's my animated letters, right? Letters animated is the name of that. So if I take all of these and I pre-comp them, and I duplicate my pre-comp, and I take the copy and I move it forward 1 frame, I tell the bottom copy to use the top as an alpha inverted matte. You see what it makes? It makes this interesting sort of leading edge animation, which even on its own is pretty cool. One problem is it does give you this 1 or 2 pixel stroke here. So I do need to get rid of that. So what I would do is just take the top copy, apply a simple choker to it, and just erode it a little bit until that goes away. There we go. Right, and now you get this interesting leading edge comp that you could do. You could layer that on top of your Write-On and get like an interesting kind of looking, like a glowing leading edge or something. All right. So yeah, so in my comp, I used that leading edge. That leading edge is, let's see, that leading edge is right there. But that leading edge really can just help add like another little, visual cue that makes it look neater. All right. So there you go. That was a ton of information. As a motion designer, you will be asked to make something right on at some point in your career, probably multiple times. And now not only 2 easy ways to do it that can be done very quickly, but now a pretty slick way to get a really very natural, painterly looking right-on effect. So thank you guys. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of 30 Days of After Effects. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for watching. I want to give one more shout out to the Department of Motion Design at the Ringling College of Art and Design. Without them, this would not be possible. If you're not on the School of Motion mailing list, please sign up. Please join our Facebook page and our Twitter page and follow us, and let everybody know if these tutorials are useful to you, and especially let me know. And also look for information about the Ringling sponsored contest that's going on during the 30 Days of After Effects. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you next time.